Hi, Claire.
Hi, can you hear me fine?
I can hear you. I just
Perfect.
wanted to let you know that we had to go live so the co-host could get in. For some reason, the link wasn't working. So Alan is on as well. We're just muting and until everybody joins.
Perfect. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Hi, Megan. We're promoting you to panelist right now.
Okay. Hello.
Hi, it's Trisha.
I have my camera on now.
We are live as we needed to get some people moved over. So we're just going to be starting in a few minutes, but I wanted to let you know we are live. Perfect. Yeah, we just want to tell people that so they don't start like picking their nose or whatever. Hi, Jan. We are live, so I just wanted to let you know that if you want to mute yourself and you can have your camera off until everyone arrives, but we had a problem getting a few people moved over to panelists, so we are live. Good afternoon, Chair Rogers and Sue. We did go live as we were having problems getting everyone moved over to panelists. So I just wanted to let you know that. We're still waiting on Schwedhelm and Sawyer.
Thank you.
Each one.
Hi, Tom.
Hello.
I just wanted to
John-
let you know that we are live as we had a few issues getting people moved over to panelists. So we're just waiting on Sawyer.
And he should be here any sec. Well,
Oh, perfect. I think he just got here.
I was going to make a comment on his technological challenges, but boom, there he is.
Here I am. Am I viewed and is sound coming across?
You're looking good, John.
All right. Thanks, Tom. I can't see myself. There we are.
We can't hear you, Chris.
That's weird. He's unmuted.
Yeah, it looks like he's trying to talk to us.
I'm trying.
Yeah. There he is.
All right. Is everybody good? Can you hear me now? All right, let's go ahead and get started and let's take the roll.
Great. Chair Rogers,
Here.
Member Schwedhelm,
Here.
Member Sawyer.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, so all of us are here. Let's do housekeeping. As a reminder to subcommittee members, please keep your audio on mute unless you're speaking. Staff will remain muted until they need to speak as well. As members of the public join the meeting, they'll be able to participate as an attendee. Your microphone and camera will be muted and only today's panelists will be viewed during the meeting. If you're calling in from a telephone and choose to speak during public comment on today's different items, the host will rename your viewable phone number as resident with the last 4 digits of your phone number, and that's what we'll call on as well. Madam Recording Secretary, could you please explain to the public how public comment will be made at today's meeting?
Great. At each agenda item, the item is presented. The chair will ask for subcommittee members to comment and then open it up to the for public comment. The host in the Zoom will be lowering all hands until public comment is open for agenda items. Once the chair has called for public comment, the chair will announce for the public to raise their hands if they wish to speak on the specific agenda item. If you are calling in to listen to the meeting audibly, you can dial *9 to raise your hand. The host will then call on the public who have raised their hands. Public comment will be limited to 3 minutes, and a timer will appear on the screen for the subcommittee members and public to see. Sorry. Once all live public comments have been heard, the meeting host will read emails submitted. If you've provided a live public comment on an agenda item, but also submitted an email, your email comment will not be read during the meeting. Additionally, there is one public comment period on today's agenda to speak on non-agenda item, which is item 2. This is the time where all persons may address the subcommittee on matters not listed in the agenda.
We can no longer
Chris,
hear
we're not
you.
hearing you.
Let's try this.
That, we heard you say, let's try this.
Okay. I apologize. I don't know what's going on. I'm feeling like John over here. I don't know. So with that, let's go on to non-agenda items for today's meeting. That is item number 2. It will be only for items that are within the purview of the Long-Term Finance Committee. But if you have a public comment that is on an item that is not on today's agenda, go ahead and hit the raise hand feature on Zoom or hit *9. And I am not seeing any hands raised.
And there was no email comment received.
Excellent. We'll move on to approval of the minutes. We have minutes from June 10th, 2021 on today's agenda item. Council members, did you have any amendments to those minutes?
I did not.
All right, let's see if there's any public comment on them. I'm not seeing any hands pop up. So without objection, we'll show those as adopted as amended. All right, we'll go on to item 4.1.
Okay, great. And Trisha's going to share her screen. Oh. That's how we're going to end it if we can get to the first slide.
I like when we start at the end, Claire, just work our way backwards.
My thunder has been stolen. No, I'm just kidding.
I apologize.
That's all good. So thank you. So the item today is focused on one element, and it is the city's loan term sheet related to the Renewal Enterprise Districts, or RED, Housing Fund. We are preparing a multifaceted package for the City Council for July 20th. This is going to be one piece of that package, but this one was important enough to bring to this subcommittee prior to that and start vetting out some of the terms of this city loan. So next slide. And before I get started on an overview of the work that's been done in the last several years, but in particular the last several months as we're looking at the use of a RED housing fund, I wanted to introduce our team because it's been a collaborative effort with the city team, but also with RED and their fund advisors. And so I want to acknowledge Megan Bassinger. She's our interim director for Housing and Community Services. So she's here on the panel. Sue Gallagher, she's our city attorney, and Jan Mazek, our chief financial officer. This has been the core team that has worked on the drafting of the terms, coordinating with the county, coordinating with RED staff, and also coordinating with the Foresight Street Advisors, which is the consulting team that's helping to set up the housing fund. And while this is a staff presentation, so that's why you see us on your panel. And even though I will be leading these slides, all of us are here to answer questions on the city team. And then I want to acknowledge that Michelle Whitman, Executive Director for RED, is also in attendance for questions, and especially as we move into some of the policy discussion points. Ulis Leapins, he's with Foresight Street Advisors, as is Daniela Graville and Olivia Speck. So those are the sort of primary folks that have kind of put this package together. And I'll give it an overview, but kind of a teaser peek. There was a lot of collaboration and alignment, so we really have very few policy issues to put on the table for you today, but we are going to be looking for some direction. So with that, this background kind of shows the timeline of how we got here into this opportunity, really. And it started with acknowledging our housing crisis in the city, and the adoption after acknowledging it as a primary goal for the city to address housing production, but all kinds of housing, market rate, affordable housing, supportive housing, the full spectrum. And in 2016, we adopted a housing action plan. And in that action plan, we had at least 30 different measures in different directions for how to address housing. And one of them was to be creative and start looking regionally and into financial partnerships to produce housing. So that's one of those tools is getting traction today with this item. In 2020, post 2017 Tubbs and Nuns fires, the city did receive a PG&E settlement amount, and that is $95 million. And with that came a lot of interest by the community upon which how to address this one-time opportunity. And one of the topics that came up through our community outreach was to address housing production. And in response to that, the Sonoma County Board of Supervisors, they as well received a PG&E settlement one-time amount, and it also went into community outreach. Late in 2020, they held a study session, and at that time, this was one of other items, but at that time they did direct that $10 million would be invested into this RED housing fund opportunity. They had a caveat. They wanted it to be matched by the city of Santa Rosa. And I'll get into a little bit about why, but essentially what is the effort here is to couple the city and the county's efforts together through the RED and the RED Housing Fund and create a $20 million opportunity to fund housing. In December of 2020, we held a study session with our city council. And at that time, we were looking at different options for investing in housing. We looked at the RED Housing Fund. We were able to introduce that to the public and ask questions about it. We also considered investment into the city's housing authority. We considered that information, and it was in February of this year that the city council, at the accumulation of the goal setting session, the city council selected to direct that $10 million in loan of the PG&E settlement funds would go to the RED Housing Fund. And so that brings us to today, and I talked about that we are packaging up this item as well as some other items that are headed to the full city council. So we are looking at, this mentions Joint Powers Authority amendment related to additional members. We are looking at an assessment request to fund the RED, and also looking at the opportunity to seat a member on the new RED Housing Fund board. Next slide. So just to, there's a lot to say about RED. There's a lot that went into it, a lot of creative thought and energy into creating something that was new and different, but also something that would leverage things that we couldn't otherwise do. So looking at housing in a regional way, looking at leveraging public and private money and nonprofit efforts, and finding an entity that could help advocate for that together, pool the financing tools together, and also share the risks and benefits that come with that. So it's a bit experimental. It was formed in 2018. So it has to date been earmarked to come up with an opportunity like the RED Housing Fund. But other examples that the RED has been enacted in is helping developers come together to do a collective grant request, be successful in that approach, where otherwise they might apply on their own and not get the grant. So again, leveraging resources and really advocating for housing production at a regional level. Another element as an example of what the Renewable Enterprise District is looking into is the EIFD, Enterprise Infrastructure District idea. And so they are looking at that as another tool that would help housing. And next slide. So the representation on the RED board is city and county as 2 members. Each has 2 seats at the table. For the city side, we have our Councilmember Fleming and Councilmember Tibbet. And for the county, we have David Rabbit and Chris Corsi. One of the item that's before you today is about the Red Housing Fund. And again, the Red has contracted out with Foresight Street Advisors, or Foresight, and they have spent quite a bit of time collaborating again with the board, with Michelle Whitman, and with the city and the county staff, and coming up with how this housing fund will get established, how it will work, and where its opportunities lie. Next slide. So I'm going to drill down into the terms of the loan and just get to our discussion for today. So it's a $10 million city loan. It's not a grant, it's a loan. And as we're progressing, we are looking to be in alignment with the county's 10 million. They are also working on their term sheet, their terms for the loan. They did have a study session on the term sheet, but they are still working on the final language of it. So we are really kind of in lockstep, and it's been an iterative process. Part of the housing fund, or not part, the housing fund is based on the leveraging potential. Right now, it's public sector capital, but it is actively looking for additional partners, whether it's additional jurisdictions as the Red receives additional members, or if it's private philanthropists or banking institutions or private institutions that care about housing at this level and are willing to invest in such a fund. And we do think there's interest in it, but for the time being, it is the city and county are the primary lenders. The lending would be based on the project criteria that's adopted by the Red board. So that's the connection between the Red and the Red Housing Fund. It would be based on the Red project criteria that is established and amended over time by that Red board. So that's the accountability of what types of projects we get funded. And the initial push, what's kind of different about this fund, the way it's launching and expecting to catalyze, is this one is open to supporting market rate. And one of the things that we've talked about before with the council is this fledgling market that we're trying to start up in our downtown in particular. There's just not enough comparables to get the types of loans that our developers need. We feel like we're close, and this is the thing that will sort of click that last gap, we hope, and able to catalyze these highly desirable mid to high rise market rate projects for our Santa Rosa's downtown. And this initial funds would allow for some of those projects to go forward. There will also be affordable projects, but it's not exclusive to affordable projects. And the idea is once you catalyze that downtown market rate development market, then the banks will start funding these projects because they will have real examples and real comparables to work with. So that's a little bit different than some of the other funding opportunities out there. And then you'll hear this a lot, especially as we go into discussion. Flexibility is key. We're trying something new here. And so we're looking at every aspect of this, trying to be nimble and flexible. And again, these are things that we can monitor, report on, adjust over time. But really at this get-go, at this startup, we are looking at a variety of different platforms and products and just flexibility in general. The Red Housing Board did consider two different types of entities, whether it's a 501(c) or a CDFI. And they have chosen to go with the 501(c) option, which is a nonprofit. And so that is the government structure that we're working with. And then administrative readiness. I think this was a question that came up quite a bit at our study session in December. How would you actually start this up? Don't you need staffing? And they sure do, because it's starting up a new entity. You need not only to figure out what your plan is and your logistics, but the board set up, and also who's going to process the notice of funding availability, who's going to monitor the loans, especially in the initial years. And so I wanted to give the subcommittee the heads up that we have been collaborating on an opportunity to use our housing authority staff, which is known to improve and to be able to be nimble and quick in processing a NOFA, and certainly to managing loans. So next slide. Okay, so we're going to get into these, and I'm just going to highlight them because I want to drill down on the couple. There's 1.5 items where I think we can spend the most time today, which is, I think, phenomenal. It just shows how much cooperation we've had across the table. We're getting down to some of, the finest of fine-tuned elements to this, but they're very important, so worth discussion. So just going through this list, so these are public loans. We want maximum flexibility. We want to help the developers make this catalytic move in our downtown. So we're looking at 0% interest. It's a 20-year loan, and the principal would be due on maturity. So as they are paid off or matured, then the idea is that they would fold back into additional projects. And then after 20 years, the city can decide it is our loan, what we want to do. Do we want to extend the offer, or do we want to take the money? Those are a lot of things that would happen at the end of the process. Three-year origination period, we'll talk about in a little bit. This is the half item. It may or may not matter depending on where we go with the other item, but the idea of an origination period is that it's going to take time to get it up and running and allocated, and the reporting structure set up, and so and also just the initial steps of activating the loans. We're looking to do this year quickly, so that's why we're headed to council on July 20th. We will be asking the council to allow and authorize the mayor to work with staff to execute the final agreements and get on with this thing. And then one thing to note is our loan, the city's loan, as well as the counties, would be subordinate to all other debt. So we will be last in line to collect, but this is not unusual for a fund set up in this way. And then I think this has come up quite a bit, just compliance with the city's investment policy. So as the money is in the escrow account and as interest earns income, that money, it's very important that it stay in compliance with our city's investment policy. So even though this is a fund that will be operated by a separate entity, that's very important. Staff feels that we connect that with that. And the county has similar stance. And then we do have a commitment to have the city's $10 million come into the city limits. And I can say that based on all the discussions at the Board of Supervisors, and certainly at the board, that the intention by the county is to also likewise invest their $10 million into our downtown, Santa Rosa's downtown, as the initial phase of the NOFA. Now, over time, there is interest in other areas of the county in general, but primarily into specific plan areas or station area specific plan areas, as well as priority development areas. And we talked about the red project criteria, and I think I have a couple of slides that highlight like what that criteria is. So next slide. So all of the projects that would be eligible for this Red Housing Fund, these loans, need to be an infill site. We are looking at mid to high density, and we are looking at mostly residential, but obviously the practicality of these transit-oriented opportunities, we want an active ground floor. So we are recognizing that probably most of these will be some sort of mixed use, but they could be residential only. And then we talked about the locational criteria. So these are all requirements. And then the next slide. And in addition to those minimum requirements, there's a second tier. And this is where you would get bonus points in your eligibility and the competition for this finite resource if you had affordable housing incorporated into your project, certainly, childcare, And certainly project readiness. We talk about shovel ready. That is going to be a high criteria for especially for this initial NOFA. The whole purpose of this is to activate housing, not to leverage investment and wait on that. So I know that will be a primary criteria. And next slide. Other fine elements of the term sheet includes that we want to make sure these loans go to housing and not vacation rentals or short-term rentals. So this is in lockstep with the county's interest as well, which is good news. So we decided to put on the table is for the term of the loan that would honor the investment that we make. And after that point, it would be subject to the interest of the project owner. And then we talked about flexibility of product types. And so again, offered to affordable projects, but also middle income and market rate projects. But the products will be different depending on that income level. So for affordable, maximum flexibility. So they sometimes need help with design costs or pre-construction costs. So these loans would be available for that. And then of course, like the middle income and market, also into construction loans and permanent loans. And then soft costs. Soft costs are for these are for the projects that are applying for the loan. Again, more flexibility for affordable projects. They tend, and this is based on our own experience working with affordable housing developers, that we wanted to set a maximum because we want them to build the housing. But we do recognize that part of their gap in financing are some of these soft costs. So the loans could support up to 25% for affordable projects and 15% for middle and market. And now we get to the item that we hope to have a discussion with you on, and that is the interest income for administrative costs for the Red Housing Fund. So it's not for the Red, it's a separate entity. Red Housing Fund will be its own entity, 5013C, have its own voting board, 7-member board. And the housing fund is, as an entity, needs to have a strategy long-term for how it's going to support itself operationally. And it's not just revolved around the NOFA or notice of funding availability. It's all the extra support that comes in play along the life of the loans. And so what we're putting on the table for discussion is a 50% max for administration that could be of the interest income that could be funneled back into the entity. And then after the origination period, which we had put on the table is 3 years, it would be there would be no ability to use that interest income and fold it back into administrative costs. That it would have to be self-supporting by leveraging fees or other monies, grants, opportunities that the fund can attract. And I want to finish the presentation, but come back to this. We do have a couple of options we want to vet out with you, and I do want to make sure that other city staff, as well as our representatives from Red and Foresight, have an opportunity to say a few words about the different options as well. Because whether you have a max or not, it makes a big difference to the fund. And if you have a max or a cap, you know, what are the different options for that? What are the implications? Next slide. Okay, and so as I mentioned, it's a 7-member board that's going to support this 5013C. Before I get to that, quarterly reports it was annual reports and quarterly reports. These are really important to have. We want to measure the progress of this. We have not done this before, and this is going to be extremely important. Lots of communication, especially in the early stages of setting this up. And so both the city and the county have earmarked specific requirements for how that gets communicated. And again, the board is going to have 7 voting members, and there is not necessarily going to be 2 advisory members. That's up for consideration by the Red board, but I'll talk about that. So makeup of the board will include one representative that represents the red board. And actually that appointment was just made, was it earlier this week? Yes, it was earlier this week I think on Monday at their meeting. They appointed Michelle Whitman to represent the red board. So she will sit on the Red Housing Fund board. And in addition, the red board recommended for appointment two of the independents. And the first of which is Veronica Ferguson. She's a former county employee, county administrator. And the second independent is Tom Sheffield. And I believe he is from the Community First Banking. And I'm sure they'll correct me if I got that wrong. And I apologize if I do. So they appointed those first 3 of the 7. And that is the minimum needed to start this entity. So we can now, once they get finalized, we can move forward with the rest of the process. But in addition to those, the city as a member will have an opportunity to seat somebody. The county will also, and then there'll be 2 additional independent seats. So we'll talk about this more on July 20th, but city staff has taken a look at the opportunity here. And we would recommend that the council consider appointing our city member representative, not any different than you would appoint other boards and commission representatives, where the council collectively decides for that one seat to be filled. We do know that there will be a number of interested candidates for that, and we feel that would be the safe, not the safest, but the most appropriate process. So you can weigh a lot of different backgrounds and interests and pick the one individual that the council can all agree on for the sake of this board. The 2 advisory members, that's an option that the red board can consider. It came up as an interest of theirs. Those would not be voting members, and those could potentially be like the one of our red board members, like Fleming or Tibbetts, and likewise the same with the county. And they would just be in a part of the board process, but not be able to vote. And next slide. So that ends the presentation that I put together for this. But again, this is the city team. So I'd like to make sure that they have an opportunity if there's something I misspoke on or misrepresented, or they wanted to add something, that now would be a great time to do that. And again, the primary discussion point is going to be on the use of the interest income and whether or not the city cares to have a cap or not, and if so, at what rate. And to do that, we should understand the implications of it.
All right, thank you, Claire. So council members, I know I had at least Michelle reach out. I think John, you probably did too, and Tom, I suspect you did as well, specifically on that question. And so it'd be helpful for me to gain some clarity on why the city is recommending the direction that we're recommending, and whether that is consistent with what other funds of this type have done.
So, and any of the city team can jump in. We felt the reason why we put a cap in place, just as a point of conversation, really was because we wanted to demonstrate that we want most of the money, certainty that most of the money, even the interest of income, even the income generated by interest, will go back into projects. So we just picked 50% because we wanted to create a cap. And so totally flexible on the percentage. The idea of a cap is just certainty that the sum of the interest income would go back to projects. So that is why we put that into play. And anyone else? Did it? Okay. But there are implications, and so I do want to make sure that Michelle and the Foresight team get an opportunity to talk about that.
Yeah, and I was in particular curious about the decision, not even just the 50%, but the decision for it to be for the first 3 years and then 0 going forward after that.
I'm not sure, Megan, Sue?
Yeah, say I'm happy to jump in, and I see Janice turned her camera on as well. The original idea behind the origination period was to give a certain term that the fund can get up and running. So to give them some startup money and able to establish the operations of their fund. And so that was the intent behind the origination period and capping the interest income during that time.
Okay, and is that typical?
I would defer to Jan or Sue. Within the housing authority, no, our products are different. And we put a principal and interest back into our lending pool. But certainly others can speak to a similar fund.
So, Mayor Rogers and committee members, so my approach in thinking about the Red Fund was, okay, this is capital investment oriented. So in my mind, it took on a picture similar to how we treat bond proceeds in a financing. And so one, speaking to interest, it's not an insignificant amount of interest over the period of 3 years. It's almost, even assuming really low rates at like 1.5%, it's about 450 million on 10 million over a 3-year period. And so what you don't want to have is when we do financings, you're limited as to the soft costs. You're limited as to costs because the goal is to deliver capital. And once you start opening, so usually capital is accumulated in the same sort of investment fund. And I thought that once you started using interest to fund operations, it goes really very quickly. And so speaking to the cap, what we gave them was like a ramp up period, thought about it as a ramp up period to, source other funds, if you will. And then after that point, which I think is a reasonable startup period, then it would solely be for capital investment.
All right, John or Tom?
If I could get clarity, Jen, I heard you say 450 million. How much money are we talking about? The 50%?
No, I said 450,000.
Okay, so that's over a 3-year period?
Yeah, at about 1.5%. It may be a little bit high now, depending on where funds are invested, but yes.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, do you want to ask other questions that we had on the presentation or just on this?
Yeah, no, any questions are fine, Tom.
Okay, John, you mind if I start?
No, please, go ahead.
So early in the slides, they talked about the admin support from the housing authority. Do we have the capacity, and what impact, if we were to go in this direction, would that have on current housing authority projects and workload?
We do have the capacity at this time. If we were looking at it as a discrete notice of funding availability and based it off of our recent experience with the CDBG-DR NOFA for $38.5 million. And so we were able to draw our time estimates from that recent experience.
Great, thanks. And then we talked about the different uses of these monies. Are we looking at this as 2 $10 million pools of funding or one $20 million pool of money?
I believe it'll be executed as one $20 million fund of money.
Okay. And then for the Red Housing Fund Board, because I had heard about it when someone was applying for, what was the process for the selection of these? And was it a conscious effort just to fill 2 of the 4 independent spots? What was the process that was used and who made those selections?
That would be a good question for Ms. Whitman, if you give her an opportunity to answer that question later, because the Red staff has processed that, the application process, the candidacy, and the presentation to the Red board. But I believe that there was interest in getting the fund up and running, which needs the minimum of 3 board members. And so that was the interest, is to start with the red board representative appointment and 2 independents.
Right. I guess for me, it was just news, and I would have, if we're looking for qualified candidates, I'm not sure if that was known to council members, say if you know of anyone, to encourage them to apply. So it's more of that process that I was told by a community member that they had applied, and which was news to me, which was somewhat surprising. And then on those positions, one being a city, whomever, if we go in this direction, is that an independent decision maker, or do we go like we've done on several appointments with the mayor, that the mayor goes to the city council, we provide direction, the mayor votes as we direct? Or is this an independent person like what we do with boards and commissions, where they're processing it on their own, even though I may have appointed someone?
It's a good question. And we'll have the answer certainly as we move forward in that process, but it will fulfill the representation of the city on that 7-member board. It will be our only dedicated city representation on that board.
Right, I get that. So ultimately, my question is, who does that person take direction from, if anyone at all?
Oh,
Those are the only questions I've got.
okay.
And I would just weigh in that Michelle, Director Whitman can probably answer that question. It's my understanding that the city will be able to choose how it chooses and structures that appointment.
Great.
But I would ask that Ms. Whitman confirm or clarify.
Thank you.
And through the chair, I've been unmuted. This is Michelle Whitman. I'm just waiting for a cue to talk. So
Go for it.
whenever you want me, I'm ready.
Yeah, if you could answer, go ahead.
All right. So if we can go back to the first question on the recruit or the solicitation for the independent board members, Council Member Schwedhelm. We did distribute that really pretty widely, but I didn't send it to you. Be happy to do it because we've just today opened a solicitation for 2 more independent board members that will be appointed at probably in August. So I'll make a note to send that to you. We want a deeper pool. It was sent out to thousands of recipients on various distribution lists. And we only got 6 applicants, 6 really good applicants, but we definitely want a deeper pool for those next 2 seats. So thank you for bringing that up. And then with regard to board composition, this is a nonprofit. It's not a government agency. And for the purposes of scaling the fund, for the purposes of instilling investor confidence for outside investors, and there are a variety of reasons why it needs to be an independent board. It will have the city, the county, and the red appointee, and then the independents. The county, for their appointee, is, last I heard, considering somebody from the Auditor Controller's Office, somebody with a financial background. Forsyth has set up a number of these funds, and the board composition for those funds, and they are in different cities around the country, have generally had somebody from either to represent the city or the county, somebody with an economic development background, somebody with a housing authority background, or a finance background. But what the city does with that appointment is your prerogative. And I think those were the only 2 questions that were directed at me, but correct me if I'm mistaken.
Yeah. Thank you, Michelle.
My pleasure.
Michelle, John Sawyer, I have 2 questions, or one request. Could you, when you send the list or the call for applicants out to the mayor, could you include the list, the original list of contacts that was distributed? And I assume that was done from the red board. Who came up with the original list?
So I sent I have a network that for all of our board meetings, for example, it's a population of about 100 individuals. but Supervisor Corsi sent it out to his newsletter list. The county GovServe distribution list, which is huge, it went out to that. It went out to the county CDC, a variety of lists that the CDC has, the Community Development Commission. So it was very broadly distributed. I changed the language a little bit in this current solicitation in case it was intimidating, trying to make it a little bit more welcoming. So I'd be happy to forward that to you, as well as the list of distribution lists that it went to.
Okay, that sounds good. It's just so we're not duplicating lists. Just want to make sure we get a nice wide berth.
Yeah.
And the other question I have has to do with the administration. In the question or the text that was sent out earlier today, there seemed to be a little bit of anxiety around. I wasn't really sure whether it was the cap or whether it was the 3 years. I'd have to reread the text, but what concerns me is it sounds like, and what Jan has just mentioned, is that there's about in those first 3 years about $700,000 in administrative costs, potentially from interest alone. And what concerns me is, especially in government, administration can start to get very expensive, and can what cost a little more in the public sector than it does in the private sector, and I understand the reasons why. But I'm curious if there are if there are any estimates as to the administrative costs in those first 3 years, and why potentially, according to our figures anyway, that it could cost quite that much for 3 years of administration.
Sure, I'm happy to answer that. And today we were able to share some projections with the team here that I think cleared up some misconceptions about what the financial plan looks like for the fund over time. So you're right, Councilmember Sawyer, there will be more activity at the beginning here. We're going to generate more fees at the very beginning. And in fact, we expect that the fund, if it's able to retain revenue, can start paying its own overhead as early as year 2. And so we're out fundraising to get the overhead covered for year 1. What we have to remember and keep in mind, this is my first time setting up a housing fund. Forsyth has done a bunch of them, and they can really fill in the gaps if we'll open their microphones. But let's keep in mind that this is a 20-year fund. We're going to generate fees at the beginning. We are then going to be servicing loans and have overhead for 20 years when we're no longer generating fees. Some of the market rate projects will have hopefully constructed their projects, return the money to the fund, and then we're recycling it to go out to affordable projects that weren't caught in the first phase. So the spread is on affordable projects is, a lot narrower than the spread for the market rate. So what we've done is come up with a financial model so that this fund can support itself through the 20 years. It's going to be negative certainly for the second half in terms of revenue it's returning. So it's important that if we've been positive at the beginning, that's retained and it sustains it in the later years. I'm very concerned about setting up a fund that cannot sustain itself. The margins are thin. This is not a board that's going to be serving champagne and caviar at its meetings. The board members themselves are extremely high qualified. Certainly Veronica and Todd Sheffield, they could make money being on boards. They're going to be uncompensated. I want to be able to attract and retain really strong board members. And I don't want to set this up to fail. And that was if you heard any anxiety in my text today, that was it. I want this to be a shining success, something that other communities are going to look at and say, wow, they did it, we can do it too. The other funds that Forsyth has set up have this same model. They know it works. And those have been in bigger cities. I believe we're the smallest city, and believe me, Santa Rosa is not a small city anymore. We need to recognize we're a real city. But this is the first city of its size, as far as I know, that has set up this type of fund. So I really want to prove it as a success and not something that struggles along, stresses out the board members, can't achieve its mission and its goals. So I'll stop ranting, and I don't know if you want to open it up to Forsyth, but they're definitely the smartest well, maybe not in the entire room, but they know a lot more about this than I do. And Claire, by the way, fantastic presentation, Claire. You've really become a student of this, and I respect that. Thank you.
Well, and thanks, Michelle. And I would like to hear from Forsyth, because I'm curious as to what the anticipated administrative costs will be, to put some to kind of ground me in the importance of not having a cap, and just kind of an explanation as to kind of to raise my comfort level, I guess, because not having a cap it starts to throw the door open, and my lack of familiarity with this kind of product it would help to hear from them as to why a cap is not a good idea in those first 3 years.
Sure. This is Ulysses Lupins with Forsyth. I can go first, and then Danielle can chime in with more details. I would just comment that we have set up a variety of these funds across the spectrum, from New York to San Francisco to Los Angeles to Baltimore, generally larger cities than Santa Rosa and Sonoma County. And we've never had a cap before. It is challenging to have a business, essentially a new business that you're setting up that is intending to provide loans and not be able to take any of the interest income from the business activity of the new fund and use that to pay for the services it needs to provide. It's something we haven't previously encountered. It does present significant challenges to limit that income in the first 3 years and take it away in subsequent years for a 20-year period. It really means that we are struggling to come up with a model where you can essentially put away enough money from lending income in the first 3 years to sustain 20 years of operations. And it's not something that we've previously had to solve for. I would say that the challenge is exacerbated by the size of the fund. In general, those cities that I mentioned are larger cities where sort of the corpus of lending capital is larger. You can make more loans, have more investment activity, generate more income. $20 million is relatively small for the level of service that's going to be needed to sustain this sort of an effort.
I certainly appreciate that explanation. And the last thing I would want to do is to set us up for failure. And it's in essence my ignorance of this process and this kind of product that makes me question that. So that's a great explanation, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
If I may, through the chair.
Yep.
We want this to be successful as well. So we did meet with them earlier today, and we did learn a lot about the 20-year projections and what the cap would do, and that the income that is earned in the early years offsets the needs in the later years of the loan. So 100% we get that, and we want it to be successful. When we were looking at the draft terms, we were weighing on the overall strategy from the inception of the fund was that it was not going to be just the city money and the county money, and even this extraordinary one-time fund opportunity. We always imagined that there'll be additional funds leveraged in this, and that they would also have some fair share responsibility to support the administrative operations. What we learned this morning through our conversation is that there is activation and some encouraging information about that we may get additional partners in the fund, but more than likely, the biggest capital will be the city and county's contribution. It's a lot of capital. It's a great opportunity. So it will be our interest income that really takes the lion's share of supporting the fund. And that's just what we learned. And so we're looking to you for where you want to weigh in on it. And we don't have a strong opinion either way, but it's just learning about how this works and how important the city's contribution is to the whole fund itself.
John, any other questions?
No more questions at this point. Thank you.
Tom? Okay, we'll go ahead and see if there's any public comment. All right, I'm not seeing any.
No emails were received.
Okay, I'll go ahead and bring it back then here for some discussion and perhaps some direction here. So Sue and Claire, I assume that what you're looking for is for the committee to sign off on the term sheet to send to the full council. All right, I'll start with you, Tom, and see what your thoughts are.
Could you just specifically ask what specific direction did you want to hear from us? Is it the 50% of the first 3 years? Is that what we're talking?
I think yes on that and on the rest of the term sheet, if you're comfortable sending it to council for approval.
And my understanding is that is the recommendation of at least the city staff, that what we've received here, that is the recommendation that go forward with to the entire council. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Yes, we'd like to move all of the terms forward, and really we're down to like on slide 9 of the presentation where it talks about interest income, where we should apply a cap or not, and if so, at what rate?
Right. I don't have a number. I'm supportive of the staff recommendation, and I'd be interested to hear when you said on July 20th with the entire council where they feel with that. I'm a little bit concerned what we heard from the consultants, where no one else has done this. So might be some more exploration before the 20th council meeting.
John?
Thanks, Mayor. Well, I can certainly see Tom's position. I'm leaning in the other direction. I am the subject matter expert is cautioning us about several issues around the concerns around given the size of the fund and trying to use the model that is usually applied to larger cities. And I understand that. I feel like we are being cautioned to not tie the hands of the board in exercising its ability to be successful. And although I'm generally conservative when it comes to kind of unknown numbers, and there are some unknown numbers here that as far as administrative costs, I'm concerned with setting us up for failure. Now, I'd be willing to take staff's recommendation and bring it to council, but at the same time, I would want to have a thorough conversation with the consultants and allowing them to bring their cautions to the council, because it's the subject matter experts that I'm looking to, and this is an unusual, at least for Santa Rosa and for the county, an unusual program. Not for the consultants. They sound like this is a pretty commonplace project for them. And even though I am oftentimes concerned about how high administrative costs can go, and that every dollar that goes to administration is a dollar that doesn't necessarily go to a builder. So I'll go with the staff recommendation, and expect a full vetting of the reason why the consultants are concerned about it to the full council, and allow us to hear. And by that time, we may have even more details that will help us to make a decision. So I'll go with staff's recommendation and then expect that full conversation with the council.
All right, and I see both sides of it as well, John. And I too was leaning towards the direction of the experts for Forsyth as well. I think I'm going to stay that way. And my preference would be that we send it without the cap, and then have staff get additional information, talking with Forsyth and others on whether they would still stick with their recommendation when it comes to council. It sounds like we will have a more deep conversation around that point in particular. And I hear the direction from the subcommittee. My preference would have been to go with the Forsyth recommendation and then ask staff for more information, not the other way around. But it looks like that's the direction that we'll go, is passing on the term sheet to council as written in the draft document. And we'll have a lively discussion, I think, amongst the full council.
Well, Mayor, can I ask for a reconsideration?
I'm fine with that, but I'll look at Tom and make sure Tom's with that too.
It's a toughie. I mean, this is just, I feel like I'm shooting in the dark, and hoping to hit the target. And I have a feeling that we're going to get a really full conversation at the council, justifying our recommendation. And because I'm really split. I'm really split on this, but based on what I'm hearing from Forsyth, it does concern me that we might be setting ourselves up for failure, at least in part. And so if I had to lean in, if a forced lean would push me into your camp at this point.
And honestly, John, for me, the deciding factor is that we have made decisions to be bold and to try new things. And I said this when we committed the 10 million to the Renewal Enterprise District. I think we owe it to ourselves and the staff to see whether or not we can make this work. And if the recommendation from folks who have done this is that we don't have that cap, then I'm going to listen to that for now. So.
Yeah. And I'm loath to not take staff's recommendation, because I usually do, and I'm sure that they're struggling with this one as well. But there's no one that wants this to work more than they do. I know that to be the case, and I just want us to be successful, one way or another, with as much information as we can garner to make that happen.
All right, we have our direction then.
Thank you.
And like I said, I think we'll have another lively conversation when we come to the full council. So item 5, next meeting agenda items. Do we have anything, council members, that you see as urgent that we need to set for our next meeting? And I will say, I was mentioning this to John earlier in discussions about the broader budget topic conversation that we had on Tuesday. I do intend to ask the city manager to start bringing some of those conversations that Councilmember Schwedhelm that you requested, the deeper dive to look into each department later this year to see whether or not we can start doing each month looking at a different department with a more deep look. I'll talk more with the city manager about how we actually schedule that. Outside of that issue, is there anything that you want on the next long-term finance committee agenda?
You know, for me, with all the discussions we've been having, there's so many priorities we're going through now. And I think we just had a new date for their council goal re-establishment of the priorities. You know, I would leave it up to you, Mr. Mayor, because you're having more of these conversations than I think John or I are. But I don't have anything specific that I'd really like to talk to at our next one.
Okay.
And I agree. I mean, other than that deeper dive, and what you brought up the other night, Tom, as far as looking at, and we were being specific to one department, but indeed all the departments. In my experience on the council, I don't believe we've ever allowed staff to look at their departments in quite that way, where they do that deep dive, look at those services that they feel that they absolutely need to provide to the community. Those that are maybe a little on the cusp, and some that could go by the wayside, to allow them to fully provide the services in those other areas that are so important. The tier 1 services, I guess, whatever we want to call them, to give the various departments an opportunity to really look at and analyze what they need to do, what they want to do, and what they are capable of, and so what they have the capacity for. So I'm really looking. It's going to be a lot of work. I'm looking forward to that exercise. It will not be a small one, but in my experience, it's never been done, and I think it's probably, this would be a great time to start that process. So thank you, Mayor, for offering to bring it back to this subcommittee. And our plate is full, and our meetings are long, and if we can avoid any more, 12 and 13-hour meetings, I'm all for that, but I don't see that on the horizon.
Hate to tell you, John, you're not going to like next Tuesday.
I figured.
Okay. Jan or any other staff, is there anything, Alan, is there anything pressing that you want to see on the next agenda?
I don't have anything. We may want to, well, I don't know if Jan does. If Jan doesn't either, maybe this is one, or we cancel that one. I'm not sure.
I don't have anything right now. That doesn't mean something won't come up, but I don't have anything right now.
We'll keep it on the agenda.
And then we can cancel, right?
Yeah, found hour is always a good hour. So, all right.
All right. Goodbye.
I appreciate that. We'll go ahead and adjourn this meeting, and I'll see you all soon.